Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, October 9th, 2022, and today we're going to be talking about a 2022 Senate election prediction, just 1 month until the November midterm elections. Now, before this video gets started, I apologize for how my voice sounds. I lost my voice for the past 2 days. This video was actually meant to go out, I think, just about 2 days ago, so it has been a little while coming. The prediction is from 2 days ago. Not much really has changed between then versus now, but getting closer to the election, something things do change overnight, but in this particular case, it doesn't look like anything is needing to be updated from what my prediction was expected to be on October 7th. So treat this prediction as a 1 month out until the November midterm elections. I won't sound like this in my future videos. I promise you that. I've lost my voice temporarily. I'm doing everything I can to get it back so I don't sound like this. But altogether, the show must go on. We must continue talking about elections because we are 29 days away until the midterms, which means there is quite literally not a day to spare. So let's get started on this Senate prediction. We are going to start off with our safe states for both political parties. If you're new here, a safe state means a state that we expect to go to a certain side of the aisle by 15 points or more. And that's just a way of pretty much telling ourselves that these races are not going to be competitive. In between now and November, you should not expect anything to come out of some of these races when it comes down to competitiveness or lack thereof. So characterizing it on both Democrats and Republican side, you have the typical states, the West Coast, solid for the Democrats, middle of America. Heart of America, North Dakota, South Dakota, Kansas, Oklahoma, which has 2 elections. If you're wondering what this circle is right here, it just means that there's a special election going on. A Republican senator chose to retire from his term early. So for right now, it's going to be a special election that is prompted. There will be an additional election a little bit later down the line, I think in 2024, that will allow this candidate to serve out their full term. So looking at our map here, we have 11 remaining seats that have yet to be characterized, 45 for the Democrats in their safe column and amongst the others that are not up for re-election, and 44 for the Republicans. So you're already starting off with an extremely competitive battleground region, extremely competitive battleground set of states. On top of that, the Senate majority is just 50-50. So when you take a look at where we are and you put that all together, you realize that we are quite literally in the narrowest possible majority in all of American politics, because it's 50-50 and decided by Vice President Kamala Harris. So for right now, the Democrats have the advantage in the chamber of the Senate, but this is a better year for the Republican Party than where it was back in 2020 and 2018. Before we get into these predictions, we're going to compare the numbers now versus where they were 2 years ago and 4 years ago to give you a better idea of where that stood when that, both of those times you saw some improvements for Republicans, some improvement for Democrats. 2020 was really where the Democratic Party came through. They won the Senate majority back after losing it in 2014, lost again in 2016, lost again in 2018. In fact, despite it being a blue wave year in 2018, the Republicans actually gained seats from the Democrats. That's just the circumstance of being in a pretty unfortunate map for the Democratic Party. But for 2022, the Democrats lead the generic ballot by 0.9% nationwide. In 2020, that was 7% across the nation. And in 2018, that was 8 points across the nation, 9 points by the time we reached Election Day, which actually was quite spot on. So in 2018, a midterm year without President Trump on the ballot. The reason why I mention him is because he has been in very many ways an indicator of faulty polling. What you found here was that Democrats actually performed nearly on the spot here within a point of what this prediction actually was by the final polls in 2020. The Republicans were actually significantly did better than what the polls had predicted. They said the Democrats would win the generic ballot by 7 points. They ended up winning it by about 4. So about a 3-point drop off, which actually made a significant difference. And Democrats actually lost seats in the House elections that coincided with the presidential election, which is significant because Democrats typically gain seats. I think this is the first time in the 21st century that Democrats, or since 2000, that Democrats lost seats in a presidential election when it came down to the House. Even in 2016, Democrats picked up 6 seats, even though Donald Trump won in areas that had never been won by the Republican Party in 28 years. So looking at our Senate map here, with our remaining 11 states, you recognize and realize that we are in a better environment for the GOP than 2020. But unfortunately for the Republican Party, our Senate map is not the same. We are working with different groups of people, we are working with different sets of states, and we are working with a different slate of candidates. Fortunately for the Democratic Party, they have no open seats except for the one in Vermont, in which the Democratic candidate or Democratic incumbent House of Representatives member is running for Senate in the state of Vermont. So that one won't even be competitive. It's a Biden plus 20, plus 30 states. So realistically, was never on the radar. But in our states here, Democrats had 49 incumbents that were either not up for re-election or running for re-election, which meant they really weren't in that much of a vulnerable position when it came down to open races. Republicans, on the other hand, had a number of open races. The most notable ones, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, states where the Republican Party currently has an incumbent that chose not to seek re-election. Another state I would include into this list is the state of Ohio. For a period of time, it was possible that Wisconsin and Iowa were going to join the bunch, but obviously that did not happen. But for the three main states that we can think about, we also can include Missouri and Alabama to some extent, but they are safe Republican and we're practically always going to be safe Republican given the certain set of candidates. But looking at North Carolina, looking at Ohio, looking at Pennsylvania, they have absolutely become one of the major focuses of our Senate elections. And had the Republicans ran for re-election, honestly, they'd be faring a lot better because the most important factor in any midterm election is incumbency, first and foremost. So, with our 11 remaining states, let's go ahead and characterize some that we really don't need to worry about much, but will still be within a reasonable margin for both sides of the aisle. This starts out with the state of Iowa, which I'm going to characterize as a likely red state. This really just comes down to the fact that Chuck Grassley has always been an incumbent who has won his elections. Realistically, he never faced that much opposition when it came down to winning. Across the state of Iowa, his closest race was his first race, and he's been in the state of Iowa in the Senate for decades, since the 1980s. Quite literally was elected in the year 1980. So he's running for re-election, going on potentially 50 years in the U.S. Senate. But for right now, it looks like voters are slightly discontent with his older age and length and tenure in terms of the time that he served in the U.S. Senate, but it isn't enough to see him lose that race. The next state we're going to characterize is the state of Florida, in which you have Marco Rubio, the senator who in 2016 outperformed Donald Trump by about 7 points statewide. Rubio truly has a very, very good shot at victory. Rubio wins over minority voters in a way that Republicans typically are unable to do so, especially in the state of Florida. Rubio also isn't necessarily this extremely necessarily polarizing figure. I definitely think he can be polarizing to some extent, but he's not seen as this universally hated or universally drama-heavy type of senator. He's just Florida senator, and that's what he's known as. He ran for president in 2016. Yes, he lost that primary to Trump, but what we found in the general election was that voters actually preferred him to Trump when it came down to the overall margin. So seeing that, knowing how Rubio performed in 2016, I can only imagine in a year better for the National Republican Party that Marco Rubio does perform better in Florida, especially with what we've seen in terms of minority shifts in the state of Florida among specifically Hispanic voters. Marco Rubio already had a very good in with them when it came down to electoral politics, and it looks like he may be able to easily expand upon that. But this isn't to say that Democrats don't have their own set of likely states that they can characterize. The first one I'd characterize is the state of Colorado, where Republicans were really hoping that at some point in time, Colorado would become more competitive. But unfortunately for them, that has not become the case. The state of Colorado has been a pretty strong state for the Democratic Party, especially more recently. Voted for President Biden by 13.5%. In addition to that, elected John Hickenlooper to the U.S. Senate over Cory Gardner, the Republican incumbent, back in 2020 by about 9 points statewide. I do get it. We are in a much better year for the Republican Party than 2020. But at the same time, I don't think that is enough to persuade me to see that Republicans have a fighting chance in the state of Colorado. They are under fundraised. They don't have the best candidates in that race. They have the best in terms of their options, but realistically, these are losing races. And right now, the Democrats absolutely have the upper hand. Everything is indicating Democrats are going to win in Colorado, unless we are expecting to be super, super shocked by the result this November. Colorado is going to be a very good blue state for the Democratic Party. The next state I'd characterize as a likely blue state is the state of New Hampshire. This was one of the prime pickup opportunities for the GOP when it came down to the last election, to this election in specific, especially knowing that Chris Sununu, as the incumbent Republican governor, already was extremely popular, had a stake in the game, could have ran for Senate, had people in his family, his father who served as a U.S. Senator from the state of New Hampshire. I mean, it was practically perfect for Chris Sununu to decide to run for Senate, and he decided against it. When he decided against it, that's when we realized the Republican Party was really going to have to scramble when it came down to running a top ticket candidate. They were talking to people such as Kelly Ayotte, who used to be the Republican senator from this state who lost in 2016. She turned down the opportunity to run for this race. Honestly, she'd be faring better than Don Bolduc, who is the current nominee in the state of New Hampshire, but altogether, not the best look for the statewide GOP. And as a result, we have found a lot more coalescing around the Democrat by voters across the state in both of the House districts. It looks like the Democrats are on track to have a pretty solid victory, despite this year being not that good for them nationwide. But in the state of New Hampshire, it honestly looks a lot better than it does for Democrats on the national level. So that brings the Democrats to 47. That brings the Republicans to 46. Let's continue characterizing states in the lean column for either side of the aisle, just to get us a number closer to who's going to actually be in the majority by the time we reach the end of the election. For the Republicans, we're going to start off with them by characterizing some of their states. The first state I'd characterize as lean red is the state of Ohio. I think J.D. Vance is running a poor campaign. I think Tim Ryan is running an excellent one. I think if this was 2018, Tim Ryan would be winning. But it isn't 2018, and it's not 2020, it's 2022. And I think on that basis alone, considering Trump's margin of victory in 2016 and 2020, it was the exact same. Considering Trump's influence across the state, considering Republican Party performance across the state in recent elections, I will say that I think J.D. Vance wins the state of Ohio, but I do think it's closer than where it was back in 2020. I think, again, Tim Ryan is running an excellent campaign, but sometimes that isn't enough, and I don't particularly think it will be enough in the state of Ohio. As we continue through, we have the state of North Carolina, which we can characterize as a lean red state as well. A lot of data seems to indicate that this race is going to be extremely competitive, and I don't doubt that it will be at least somewhat competitive, but to the extent that I think it's going to be the most competitive race or currently has the Democrats ahead, I don't buy it. North Carolina is one of the few states that routinely is a quote-unquote swing state, but almost always votes for the GOP, has voted for the Republican Party for the past 50 years on the presidential level without fail, except once in 2008. I mean, what we have seen from this state is that Republicans have clear and consistent control election after election, and while Democrats do have some types of victory, such as the governor's race or one presidential election by 14,000 votes in 2008, I'd say for right now I'm comfortable characterizing Representative Ted Budd and saying that he will become the next senator from the state of North Carolina. As we move over to a state that the Democrats currently have a lean margin of victory in, I would characterize the state of Arizona. I think right now, Mark Kelly holds a pretty substantial lead over Blake Masters. In addition to that, it really is just a lead on every single front, whether that be fundraising, whether that be polling data, whether that be endorsements, whether that just be overall volunteer efforts and campaign ability. Mark Kelly is very strong. Favorability ratings, he's stronger, right? Everything tells us that Mark Kelly is on track for re-election and that Blake Masters is probably going to lose this election. Not necessarily overwhelmingly. I don't think it's going to be a blowout. That's why it's in the lean characterization. But I do think that Mark Kelly ends up winning and potentially somewhere around 3 to 5 points. I do think it's a very good possibility that Mark Kelly outperforms where he was back in 2020, even if that doesn't exactly fit what we can expect for this type of year. Politics is weird, and this is an example of that. For Republicans in their next state that I would characterize as lean red, I would say the state of Wisconsin takes that characterization. Ron Johnson and Mandela Barnes were in a competitive race before, but I don't think that necessarily holds true now. Mandela Barnes is probably not going to win. Ron Johnson is a better candidate, I would say, than most people do expect, just simply looking at his favorability ratings. Ron Johnson is unpopular. Yes, that is absolutely true, but at the same time and on that same merit, he's not someone who is on track to lose re-election. He can be unpopular and win re-election, and he's done that more than once, and he probably is going to do it again. I think Ron Johnson, though, will be in a competitive race, but I still think at the end of the day, the Democrats do take the to lose this race, and the Republicans have the upper hand and will win the state of Wisconsin as of right now. So that leaves us 49 to 48. Democrats, though, do have a silver lining in the state of Pennsylvania. This is the first pickup for either side of the aisle, and it's a pickup for the Democratic Party. Pennsylvania goes to John Fetterman. I think Dr. Ross has been really inexplicably weak candidate across the state itself. If this was David McCormick, it would be likely red. It would be locked down. This is a state reminding you with a Republican incumbent. So to see a Democrat pulling ahead on its own or even tied is a victory in itself. But specifically in the state of Pennsylvania, I will say the Democrats, I think, narrowly have the upper hand. They defeat Dr. Oz by a blowout. Absolutely not. but I do think it happens, and I think it happens because of how weak Dr. Ross is as a candidate, what John Fetterman has been doing in terms of his strategy across the state itself. But I still think it will be close because we are in Pennsylvania in 2022, and it was a state that Biden only won by 1. So to expect it to be significantly more than that for John Fetterman is quite naive, if you ask me. The final 2 states, Nevada and Georgia, will be very important ones because they are going to determine the balance of power. One of them has a tilt characterization, the other has a lean characterization. And that state with a lean characterization is the state of Georgia. I think Raphael Warnock now has probably one of the highest chances at victories that we have seen for him in quite some time. I think looking at my expectations for the Senate map, Georgia has practically been a tilt blue state for quite some time, being lean blue in August, but then reverting back down to tilt. In fact, for about half a year, I had the Republicans ahead in the state of Georgia. I had Herschel Walker ahead in the state of Georgia up until recently when I've become more confident in the Democratic Party. That confidence was wavering a little bit, but following the recent scandals coming out of the state of Georgia, I have no other choice but to characterize Georgia as a lean blue state rather than tilt, which puts the Democratic Party in a significantly better position, and it's not just me. When you take a look at the forecast from FiveThirtyEight, the Democrats are at their highest point ever that they have ever been in the Georgia Senate race, and that's very impressive, and it's something that I see as an indicator that, hey, Georgia's moving in a different direction, and it doesn't exactly involve the Republican Party. But for this final state, we have the state of Nevada, a state where Republicans are probably going to do better than they did in years past. I also think one thing that we really forget when we look at the state of Nevada is that the minority voters in this state shifted pretty heavily from 2016 to 2020 in favor of the Republican Party. Yet it didn't move. Yet it didn't go to Donald Trump. And the reason for that was because white voters counteracted that shift and moved it back in favor of the Democratic Party. And I think that in itself is impressive because Democrats were able to counteract major minority shifts, not only in Nevada, but also across the United States. But that was never going to be a reliable voting bloc the way that minority voters had always been in the state of Nevada and in many other parts of the nation. I think right now, what we will see is that the Republican Party will make narrow improvements, enough so to outperform Catherine Cortez Masto's 2016 margin of 2.4% and does end up winning the race. Narrowly, for sure, but I think Adam Laxalt, especially being one of the better nominees for the Senate in the state of Nevada, one of the better nominees across the country for the National Republican Party, but I do think it'll be close, and I think Democrats can absolutely walk it back, but as of right now, I'd bet on the Republican winning in Nevada. So, final map here, nothing changing in terms of the overall numbers, but Nevada and Pennsylvania trade parties. Closer races than expected in Ohio, North Carolina, and Wisconsin, pretty much on par in other states. Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Colorado. These are states where you really would expect them to go the way that they are right now. Maybe not necessarily in the context of the year, but I'd say for right now, I think the Democrats and Republicans are in pretty good positions across the United States, but ultimately, the Democrats do have the upper hand. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today. Sorry, tomorrow.